Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us today with Cove Data Protection. My special guest and someone I really admire in the industry is Chris Groot, GM of product for Cove Data Protection. Thanks, Chris, for hanging out for BDR is dead. Long live BDR.
Oh, it's going to be a great chat here, Keith.
I bet. Something we speak about a lot in what we do, but we also like to have a little bit of a banter and conversation and share some opinions about that appliance, that box, that thing that we drag around. Chris, what are the things that are you're thinking about? What are the things that you're hearing? What are the things that make sense to you?
Well, I'll tell you. So, the appliance has long been around, since like going back to 2014. I remember just, that there was a lot of activity. Certain other vendors were alive and, declaring, um, truths about backup. And that was true at the time. And,
Yeah,
and certainly a lot has changed in the last 7 years, which has, uh, both in terms of people's mindsets, what I would call their BDR ideology, how
yeah,
they think about the problem. The threat landscape certainly has changed. We used to think about instant recovery being like the main thing all the time, but which is still very important, of course. But in terms of cyber threats that we and destructive cyber attacks, the impact of those and how they get managed, it's a little different, right? So we're solving for a different type of problem alongside of the original, traditional problems of data loss and hardware loss and site loss and so on. So a lot has changed. And then the third piece is really the attitude towards hardware
yeah.
and the old days of, we used to just be used to going through the Dell website and clicking off and, you know, today in the world of hyperscalers, the fact that you can just log into a website, tune everything perfectly, don't pay for it until you absolutely need to start using it. Um, that's changed things, right? The game's changed a lot.
I think you're right, and I think there's an entire generation of individuals who have zero experience with, say, an LTO tape or an appliance-based solution or a local solution that we got to be thinking about them a little bit and getting ahead of that sounds like what you were just saying right now, like that new hyperscaler. Let's explore that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, okay. So just to break it down real easily, if you can imagine for a moment it there. Why do we have it originally? Well, first of all, backup was a problem. You needed somewhere to land your backups, like as a
Right.
starting place, and then you'll bolt on like a secondary process, push it off site. So that's kind of your traditional anything that would be considered an appliance-based backup or a pure image-based backup. Um, and one of the things architecturally um, that we thought about was, wouldn't it be great if you could just get that directly to the cloud? But what's the problem is you can't move that much data, right? It can't be a bulky backup. And so really the challenge was, how do you make those backups as small as possible and as efficient as possible? And that's really one of the areas of key innovation, where Cove kind of turns that architectural, takes a different architectural approach,
Yeah.
and it just cascades into addressing the idea of being able to use like a hyperscaler as a point of recovery. So that's pretty exciting. And yeah, so secondly, then of course, when
Yeah.
the idea of the BDR box, outside of backup, then was when it came to recovery. Of course, this was the promise that people bought, was production goes down, BDR box is there to bring things back up very quickly. Um, and I would say that the the use of those BDR boxes relative to the cost, it just never really got used.
Yeah.
Once in a while it would be used, and it was really important and really great at that moment. But you were sort of paying the freight the whole way along for something that maybe got used once every 7 years for a particular end client, in the sense of a true outage. Now, regular recoveries are happening
Sure.
on a regular basis, but the mindset of ideally you want to stay on production. So does that, like, something goes wrong, you're going to do everything you can to fix the actual production environment, not utilize your BDR, because that's the last thing you want to do, because then you're into a whole nother world of hurt, right?
For sure.
Have you heard that? Have you heard that story before? By the way,
Tell me again. I want to hear it.
no. I'm saying, have you heard the story from people you're talking to about,
Yes,
like,
of course. I thought you had a
staying
specific
on
one in
production?
mind. Yeah. Um, it's just something you never want to touch. I think it's one of those events that we plan for, but we know we're never going to do it. We know that we don't want to use a BDR appliance in the event of any sort of disaster, because it wasn't necessarily provisioned to run my environment. It's an emergency stopgap, and in some organizations it might have become a crutch. Something goes wrong, let's use the BDR. And maybe that's not the best way to approach that problem. Maybe solving the problem, moving upstream a little further to fix it, as opposed to just hitting a button, might make a little more sense. We didn't even get into the moment of, like, I have to maintain this monster on the ground, and I
Good
gotta,
point.
yeah. Like, what are
That's
you
part
hearing
of
about
paying the
that?
freight, right? Paying the freight is like you're patching, you're monitoring the thing. It's got to keep working. It's
Yeah.
another thing to manage, let alone buying it and shipping it, and originally, and so on. Yeah, so uh, that's a big part of the story. And then, the idea of, in terms of the other change that's happening up the other side, of course, is that the relevance and the adoption of the hyperscalers, really in the sense of, like, the BDR sort of mindset, it's sitting there ready to go at any time. It's not being
Yeah.
used, though. And the magic of that model is you don't pay for it till you use it. You can send data in for free. If you want, you can stage it so it can really be like flipping the switch. But the the networking fabric all being in place, in terms of, most companies are using Microsoft 365 today. So there's just so many layers of looking at the problem that we're trying to solve, and then looking at the benefits of a hyperscaler to solve that problem versus that traditional mindset. We've been really trained by the vendor community, of course, because that's like
That's what we do.
that's what we do. And so breaking free of some of that traditional thinking, kind of rethinking recovery, making this departure is really where our heads are at, which I
Yeah.
think is a pretty exciting proposition, because that Azure environment is not only just a temporary, like, failing over scenario. It's potentially like a migration,
Permanent
because
home.
a lot, if you've got a hardware failure,
Yep.
are you going to buy more hardware, or would you rather just bring yourself right back up in Azure and carry on with business on a long-term basis?
So you said a couple things, and I want to go explore it a little bit. You said the word hyperscaler at least 3 times, and it's a lot of fun to say. Hyperscaler.
Oh, it's
But
awesome.
yeah, it's a fun word to say. And then you said Azure, just all of a sudden. And are we talking about the same thing here?
We are talking about the same thing. So if I think about our broader set of communities, let's say there's three big hyperscalers out there. We
Yes.
got Google, we got Amazon, and we got Microsoft, right? So Azure is the
Yes.
Microsoft flavor, and that's where, truthfully, in the small, medium-sized business environment, that's where most of the Microsoft kind of stack is, where a lot of those communities are living in.
That's
So,
right.
in terms of the benefits, that's where it lives for the vast majority of our customers. So that's why I'm throwing those around a little bit interchangeably.
Well, it's interesting because there's going to be our friends who know these terms, right? And they're very familiar with it today, and it's very easy for them to get there because they've been working in it since day one, or they're early adopters. And then we're speaking to our new community of individuals who are a little unfamiliar with it. It's a new territory, and I'm a little bit afraid. And I don't really understand the cloud, and I need some help. What are some of the things that we could be doing in our conversations, just in the human level? I mean, we've been having this discussion about BDR boxes, and I think they're dead, but I also believe they have a place. And so that's why I
Sure.
say we got to keep living in this world. I think we don't have to split the atom to get to both places, but it feels like there's a roadblock somewhere. Are you sensing that at all?
There's definitely some roadblocks in terms of just adoption. Like, I mean, we see
Yeah.
this curve. I mean, the cloud, presumably has been here since, 12, 15 years now.
Sure.
Maybe if you want to consider the earlier versions, we're going back to 2000. But
Yeah.
the adoption where we are today, there's no doubt in terms of where the puck is moving, where we're going to be in 5 years, is that this is going to be mainstream. There's no, if we just dial back 5 years ago with Microsoft 365, look at the adoption, look where we are today. That was just 5 years ahead on the adoption curve. The Azure and hyperscaler adoption, same thing's happening. We're just much earlier in that process. So that's where the puck's going. There's no doubt. And the other thing that I just thought was worthy of pointing out from rethinking recovery was around the cyber
Oh,
attack
yes.
kind of
Good call.
scenario. So one quick story, and then one quick, idea in
Yeah.
terms of where the future is going. One quick story was, in the event of one event that happened last week. Great story from one of our customers. They had a small host, 4 VMs running on it. It got encrypted. It was, that scenario that you're worried about, right? They were able to recover into their local data center, like so offsite from an on-premise stuff. They were going to copy those disks over and then actually go to their client. They realized that the recovery only took a couple, or less than an hour and a half or something, but the copying that data onto a disk to actually get it to be mobile was going to take like 9 hours. And so they're like, well, this is no good. So what they were actually able to do was actually just reformat that host and lay down a completely new OS and bring those VMs back from the cloud location. And that again just took like that small amount of time, and they were right back in business. But and they had the I guess the flexibility to run the forensics and make sure that they weren't restoring bad data back into production and so on. So that was a good thing.
Yes.
And that brings me to the second point of why one of the use cases we've also learned about around using a hyperscaler is that you can kind of create a sandbox environment that is isolated. You can run full recoveries in there. You can
Absolutely.
kind of push the infected machines through the washing machine, bring in your incident response, and do things properly, not messing up your cyber insurance coverage and so on. Having a true incident response. Using Azure for that use case is just so insanely flexible and such a benefit in that case. So again, that's what we consider to be today's primary use case or concern in terms of risk, and having that as new optionality it's just it can't be beat. So
It really kind of connects to our story too, right? I mean, a lot of the discussions about the BDR box sort of start at, I want to be able to instantly spin up a VM in the event of disaster. Crypto being a big disaster in many organizations, of course. But you raised a great point. We can't just fire up the first thing available and get back up and running in a crypto attack. I think it might be the only time in our IT careers where it's a reasonable thing to shut down for a period of time to get the cleaning work going, to find that point in time where the infection wasn't happening. I mean, let's be real. If we jump a little too soon and press that button, it's so addictive that, I want to keep that customer happy. Maybe we've made a mistake. And using an Azure and a hyperscaler to do a test bed that should be a part of your recovery process right there.
no question. And yeah, I would even go further than responsible. It's a requirement.
Yeah.
It's just, it would be any other option is far too risky. So
Okay. Well, Chris, this is good information because this is a conversation at its starting point. It's going to take a long time to keep this discussion going. We're going to continue talking with our friends and our partners and our ecosystem every day about this transformation to the hyperscaler and others that are similar. BDR is dead. Long live BDR. We appreciate everything you've done so far. For me, Keith Young at Cove Data Protection, and my great friend Chris Groot, GM of Cove Data Protection. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us this morning and talking a little bit about BDR, and hopefully that's helpful in your thoughts this week as well. Thanks, everybody.
thanks, Keith. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.